you can't just allow Iranian-backed groups to kill Americans. That just cannot happen. And that's why Secretary Esper and General Mark Milley, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, have called on Iraq to do their job, so to speak, and make sure that Iranians are not allowed to attack U.S. interests in the U.S. Embassy. They said that it's up to Iraq to help with the securing of these areas, and so far they have not seen sufficient help in securing American bases.
Very, very briefly, have the Iraqis asked the Americans to scale down their presence in that country? We've got about 30 seconds.
Interesting. I asked Secretary Esper that exact question just a few moments ago, and he said no. They have not asked the United States to scale down or pull out in any way. But at the same time, they did not condemn the attacks that, let's not forget, Iraqis were also wounded in that attack in Kirkuk. So Iraq is clearly trying to walk a fine line. They want good relations with Iran, their neighbor. They want good relations with the United States. And so we're just going to have to see in the coming days what Iraqis will do.
Nearly 5 months ago, the U.S. and Afghan Taliban entered into a peace agreement. As part of that deal, the U.S. said that by this week, it would reduce its troop numbers in Afghanistan down to 8,600 and withdraw from 5 bases. The Pentagon said this week that it has lived up to its commitments, but U.S. Marine General Kenneth McKenzie, the head of U.S. Central Command, told VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb in an exclusive interview earlier in the week via phone from the region that the Taliban has not lived up to its commitments.
Has the Taliban kept up their commitments, in your opinion?
So I would not say that they have yet. We expected to see a reduction in violence. And while the Taliban have been scrupulous about not attacking U.S. or coalition forces, in fact, the violence against the Afghans is higher than it's been in quite a while. It's one of the highest, most violent periods of the war that we've seen to date. Average lethality is down just a little bit, but the number of enemy-initiated attacks is in fact very worrisome. We need to get to intra-Afghan dialogue. It is uncertain that we're going to get to that at any time soon. That's really the next critical thing that needs to happen. And that's what leads us to the long-term conditions that would allow us to actually see a future where there's far less U.S. or coalition presence in the country.
And the Army National Guard, how are they different from the actual Army, U.S. Army?
So whereas if you are an active duty Army or Navy or Air Force or Marine, if you're in that group, you are constantly being a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine. You don't have another job in your community. The National Guard, they work as medics, they'll work as firefighters, they'll work as teachers. They have all different jobs. But when they're called upon to come up and help in these domestic emergencies and sometimes overseas emergencies, then they answer the call and they come out. So a huge force. There's over 100,000 of them, about 150,000 strong of this guard, and they have been activated all across the country right now. There are about 15,000 that are currently helping this coronavirus pandemic response, and they're doing everything from building medical areas for potentially to come in and have some patients. They are also helping test some patients. They are checking patients for symptoms, and they're doing something as small but as very important as disinfecting areas so people can continue to use them and carry valuable supplies when needed. So a large range of what the National Guard is doing, but however small, they're all equally important jobs in the big scheme of this. Because think about it, if there's not enough people to drive a truck to deliver meals to these elderly that can't get food, then they won't be able to get food. And that's, to that elderly person, that really means as much as if they need to go to a hospital if they get sick.
And speaking of hospitals, we know that one massive hospital ship with about 1,000 beds has already docked in California, and now another one expected later today in New York. Can you just briefly tell us what they will be used for?
Yes, so these are the Navy's power when it comes to helping in crisis. With any medical crisis, the Navy can send out these 2 hospital ships. And so, like you said, there's the USNS Mercy that is docked in LA, and they will be taking up to 1,000 patients, which will be freeing up to 1,000 beds. And then as of Monday, the Comfort will be in New York to take in 1,000 patients to free up to 1,000 beds. Now, it's very important here. So when we were talking about the National Guard, we were talking about the Javits Center being a place where coronavirus patients could come and they could be isolated. That cannot happen on these hospital ships. These hospital ships are built for trauma. because they're built to go out and help in a war zone scenario, to go out and be available. So they're not really built for infectious diseases, and they don't have the sections and the compartments sectioned off like you need in an infectious disease outbreak. So what they're going to be doing is they're going to be screening patients very diligently to make sure that there are no coronavirus patients on these hospital ships.
Two big announcements on U.S. troops in the Middle East. The top commander of U.S. forces there announced in Baghdad Wednesday that the U.S. is reducing its numbers in Iraq from 5,200 to 3,000 this month. He then hopped on the phone with VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb for another announcement on U.S. troops in Afghanistan.
The U.S. military is withdrawing troops in Afghanistan from 8,600 to about 4,500 by late October or early November. That's what U.S. Central Command Chief General Frank McKenzie told me and two other reporters in a phone interview after leaving Iraq.
At 4,500, we're still going to be able to accomplish the core tasks that we want to accomplish. And we've shown more than ample goodwill in our willingness to demonstrate that we don't want to be an occupying force in this country, but we do have strategic interests, vital interests, that compel us to be certain that these entities, such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS, can't be guessed there to attack the United States.
4,500 to me is a greatly reduced U.S. presence. And when we last spoke in July, you said before there could be a greatly reduced U.S. presence in Afghanistan, inter-Afghan dialogues needed to start. The U.S. would need to be confident that the Taliban would not host Islamic State and Al-Qaeda terrorist groups, potentially allowing them to carry out attacks in the West. And at that point in July, you said you were not confident that the Taliban was living up to its commitments, and you were not confident that they would break from Al-Qaeda. So what's the change that's happened from July to now?
I would tell you that the Taliban has still not shown conclusively that they're going to break with Al-Qaeda. As you know, they have been very consistent on not attacking us and the coalition. However, they have continued to go after the Afghan security forces at a pretty high tempo, and there's some pretty stiff fighting going on, as you know, as a result of that. What I would tell you is at 4,500, we can still pursue the task that we need to do in Afghanistan. And our first task in Afghanistan is making sure that neither Al-Qaeda or ISIS have the ability to generate in ungoverned spaces attacks against the homeland of the United States or those of our allies and partners. We can continue to do that at the numbers we've got, at the troop level we've got now. It is still my assessment that if you want to keep going down, then we need to see some concrete things from the Taliban. We need to see them genuinely commit to and execute an intra-Afghan dialogue. We would like to see a broader reduction in violence going forward that we have not yet seen. So there are still some things out there that concern me about the Taliban's either ability or willingness to comply with all the terms of the deal.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Wednesday said that all U.S. troops in Afghanistan should be home by Christmas, just hours after his national security advisor said Washington would reduce its forces in Afghanistan to 2,500 by early next year. I spoke with VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb and began our conversation by asking her if this was an order or an aspiration.
Well, we are still trying to figure that out today, because every Pentagon or military official that I've tried to speak to has been referring me to the White House for this, which of course raises the question, was the Pentagon prepared for this announcement at all? And also the fact, like you said, that the National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, saying that we were going to be down to 2,500 troops in Afghanistan by early 2021. This is clearly very different from that. And will require a much shortened timeline. In fact, I'd love to ask Pentagon officials if it's even possible, because there's so much, hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment alone in there. Is it possible to safely and securely withdraw? Because as experts and officials will tell you, the very last thing that you want to do is to leave U.S. military equipment around for enemies to pick up and to be able to use and to be able to study and analyze. So a lot of big questions remain from this, and we're just going to have to find out over the coming hours and days what this exactly means, or is it an aspiration that he is tweeting?